Thank you to everyone joining us today from across the country and around the world. I'm Michael Higgs, Virtual Programs Manager here at Conscious Capitalism. On behalf of the CCI team, we appreciate you taking time to learn and grow in community with us. Today, we're excited to be sharing space with Raj Sisodia and Bob Anderson. As many of you know, Conscious Capitalism is a global community of CEOs, presidents, founders, board members, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders from diverse industries, backgrounds, and perspectives who are committed to the shared purpose of elevating humanity through business. We were founded in 2008 as a 501c3. We provide a community of active operating leaders, a platform to convene, participate in workshops, and interactive discussions with practical advice and tools on how our principles are integrated into different organizations and within various industries. Our community of conscious capitalists offers best practices and business strategies on how that philosophy is applied to create sustainable success within one's business, leading to systemic change and impact in the world. At Conscious Capitalism, we do this by providing learning opportunities like today's session and building systems of support for practicing conscious capitalists through our Conscious Leader Network membership as partners with the organization and engagement with local chapters. Several times a month, we offer virtual gatherings as a way for the community to see how this philosophy takes shape in the leadership journeys and business practices of those in our network. Just a few housekeeping details. Today's session is going to run for about 45 minutes. Bob and Raj will be in conversation for about 30 to 35, and then we'll go ahead and pivot to audience questions for the last 10 to 15 minutes of our time together. Do use the Q&A box on the bottom of the screen at any point during today's conversation, and we will have an opportunity to bring your questions to both Bob and Raj. If you have any technical difficulties, shoot us an email at info@consciouscapitalism.org. Now, with all of that out of the way, I am very, very excited to introduce you to both Raj and Bob. Perhaps many of you know these luminaries in leadership, but delighted to have them join us today. In this gathering, Raj and Bob, again, two top leaders in organizational development, will discuss the intersection of self-discovery and mastering leadership and the profound connections their methods play in creating truly conscious business. Let me introduce both Raj and Bob. Raj Sisodia. Raj is a FEMSA Distinguished Professor of Conscious Enterprise and Chairman of the Conscious Enterprise Center at Tecnológico del Monterrey in Mexico. He's described as a, quote, intellectual shaman in a book with that title. Raj Sisodia has been on a mission to bring caring, humanity, and healing to business and capitalism since 2007, with the publication of his groundbreaking work, Firms of Endearment, How World-Class Companies Profit from Passion and Purpose. He's a founding member and chairman emeritus of Conscious Capitalism. He, as I said, is a FEMASA Distinguished University Professor of Conscious Enterprise and chairman at the Conscious Enterprise Center at Tecnológico del Monterrey in Mexico. He's also the co-author of the New York Best Times seller Conscious Capitalism and a Wall Street Journal bestseller of Everything Matters. Raj received his honorary doctorate from Johnson & Wales University and has served on the boards of both Maztec and the Container Store. And now on to Bob Anderson. As the founder and chairman of the Leadership Circle and co-founder and chairman of the Full Circle Group, Bob has dedicated his career to exploring the connections between leadership, mastery, competence, consciousness, spirituality, and business. Over the past 35 years, he's worked to integrate the best of the leadership theory and research, resulting in comprehensive frameworks for developing leaders. The first universal model of leadership to emerge in the field. The Leadership Circle Profile, also known as the LCP, is a leadership assessment that provides leaders 365-degree feedback through the lens of the universal model. The universal model and the profile provide organizations of any size in any industry with what they need to measure the effectiveness of their leaders, both individually and collectively, and chart the pathway for their development, and then assess their progress as they develop. Forbes named the LCP one of the top executive development assessments. Raj, Bob, with all of that out of the way, delighted to have you both join us today for a conversation with our audience. I'm going to pass it both to you for the conversation.
Thank you very much, Michael, and welcome, Bob. Great to be with you again.
Yes.
We were together in Salt Lake City a few months ago at a wonderful workshop that I think I was the only non-coach at that workshop, but this was like next level stuff for
I'm not a
coaching.
coach.
Oh, you're not a coach either, okay. But you play one on TV, I think. You only coach other coaches. You're not a coach yourself, but it was you and Nicholas Jani, whose book is The Leader as Healer, and this got into some really deep things. But before we go to the frontiers of your work, I mean, let's talk a little bit about the work for which you are widely known and celebrated, which is the Leadership Circle Profile. We started the Conscious Business Leadership Academy a few years ago, where we take 25 CEOs at a time through about a 5-month transformational journey of personal growth as well as a leader and transforming their businesses. And of course, we looked at all of the assessment tools out there. And having known you and known about the LCP, but just as part of our due diligence, looking at the other things as well, I mean, it's very, very clear that this is the most powerful tool that has at its heart the idea of consciousness, and it kind of brings together all of the different dimensions. So I just love for you to share a little bit about how that came about, the process whereby you integrated so many streams of knowledge in order to create this very elegant and deceptively simple but incredibly rich tool.
Yeah, well, thank you for this opportunity. It's good to be with you again as well. Oh boy, that's a long story. I'll try to keep it short. I've been interested in deep development my whole life. It's really the only thing I've ever cared about. And it started young, started in high school on a retreat. I invested deeply in opportunities where I could be around people who really knew how to develop, at that time, young people. And it just became a passion, and I followed it my whole life. I got a master's in organization development, and I in my first job, I got consciously, it was a deliberate development strategy on my part, to get connected with some of the top thought leaders in the field, which included people like Peter Senge and Charlie Kiefer and the folks at Innovation Associates, Robert Fritz, Peter Senge, Clay Lafferty at Human Synergistics, and so on. And I began pretty early in the early 80s to smell an integration. These were different theories, different frameworks, different language, different bodies of thought, but I could see that there was a way they were integrated. And so I started into that process. Is there a way to put these things together? And I went at that, including more and more of the field over a period of about 15 years, and doing workshops and team leadership, team development sessions, and so on to field test it, road test it, deepen it, make it really work. And then somewhere in the late 90s, I said, I wonder if we could create an assessment. I was using assessments. I was using multiple assessments to try to get at the depth that the model I had created was working at, and I couldn't find one I liked, but I could see again in the intersection of them that there was a way they could predict each other. So I knew that underneath them, if you sifted the data and organized it properly, you could get an assessment that did what multiple assessments could do at a level of depth that leads to real breakthrough or transformational insight and learning. And so I created the Leadership Circle Profile, and people told me I was crazy to do it because there's plenty of 360s out there. And I said, I was arrogant enough to say, well, yeah, but I can't find one I like. So,
Yeah.
And the rest is history. And
Yeah. And what a history. I mean, I think at last count, you had how many million people have used that tool? You've
Yeah,
got
I think we've got 300, about 350,000 leaders around the world that have been assessed and over 3 million rater surveys. So, who'd have thought? I'm as surprised as anybody by how this thing took off.
And I think many more perhaps who have just done their self-assessment, right? Because you can go on the site and just do a self-assessment,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
also gives you value. Of course, it's more
yeah,
valuable when other people too, and then you can compare.
right.
And and I think what I love about the tool, first of all, the elegant simplicity. I think the simplicity on the other side of complexity, as Oliver Wendell Holmes talked about, right? Which comes from real mastery, which you have over this domain. And it really, just for our listeners or viewers, if you're not familiar with this, it's very simple. The top part of it's a circle. The top part of it is creative. The bottom is reactive. And in our life, we want to be creative, but we often end up being reactive. And why are we reactive? Because of the things that shaped us and formed us, and the wounds and traumas, and whatever things that we grew up with that made us reactive in a variety of different ways. And then you've got the task and the relationship. The left, I think, is task, and the right is relationship, or maybe the other way around, right? So you've got these four quadrants now, right? You've got creative relationships, creative task, and then you've got the reactive in terms of task and relationship. And you can see then all of the different dimensions arrayed around this circle, which go into each one of those four quadrants, and you can see where you are on those, right? And then as a snapshot of where you are today, and therefore a developmental roadmap for the things that would really make you an even more effective leader if you can enhance the things on the top and you can work on the things on the bottom, right? Have I done it some kind of justice?
Oh, yeah, you did it better than I could. So,
Oh,
yeah.
no, no.
Yeah, the beauty of it, the power of it is that dimensions in the reactive are juxtaposed with creative. So if you say, for example, I'm getting high scores on task reactive, which we call controlling, then opposite that in the circle is a creative relating. And you're going to see your relating scores likely, because they're very highly inversely correlated, come down. And that dynamic relationship, which is all through the profile in different dimensions, just like a laser zeroes in on here's the crux of how you're deploying yourself as a leader and what's working, what's not working. But then underneath, and this is where it gets to conscious leadership, underneath that is a model of consciousness. So both in terms of stages of adult development, well-researched work on adults progress through different stages of consciousness toward greater and greater levels of maturity and effectiveness. But also each dimension has an assumption embedded in it, a habitual way of thinking. Like for me, one of them is I'm okay if you like me. Right. And so I give up. I tend to play small or back off or get risk averse, not challenging when that gets hooked. And I'm playing not to lose in service of harmony. And I give up power. And that's a problem in leadership. And so each dimension has an assumption under that, which gets right to the crux of, as you said, Raj, your conditioning, your early formation, the way you've established your very sense of identity. And how can we get insight into that and then evolve it to higher order structures of mind or consciousness?
Yeah, and then it starts pointing the way to some pretty deep personal development work.
Yeah.
Right? It starts to then go into your childhood experiences, wounds, perhaps some traumas that you've had. Where in a way did you lose connection to your authentic self?
Yeah.
Which would allow you to be your version of creative, right? The creative expression that you're here to make. And I think the one that you pointed to is probably a really common one because Gabor Mate talks about authenticity versus attachment.
Yeah.
Right? We want to be liked. We want to be, have friends. We want our parents to approve of us, etc. So that drive for attachment is so strong, and the fear of not being attached is that we give up our authenticity. We're willing to sacrifice our authenticity in that process. And I know that this was a lesson that came home to me pretty dramatically this year, actually. as I was experiencing a lot of back pain and other kinds of pain. And ultimately, we discovered that it was psychologically and emotionally rooted, right, in my childhood experiences and even as an adult. So there's a lot, incredible richness to that. And I know that you've also done, with all that data that you have now, you've also done a lot of correlations. So this is not simply, and that itself would be a lot, a tool to develop yourself as a human being, but it has obviously strong correlates with effectiveness,
Yes.
with the performance of the business,
Yes.
with the well-being of the people in your span of care, all of that, right? If you could speak to that a little bit.
Well, we've got this rich database, and it's an unusual database because of the way we've got both creative and reactive dimensions interplaying with each other. And so we have all the correlational research around how these things relate to each other. So if I'm high on arrogance, what does that do what are the strengths of that and what are the downsides of that? The other thing that's important is that the reactive part of ourselves is not necessarily a weakness. We actually take our best and build a reactive strategy around it. So when I said I want to be liked, the gift in that is a gift of relationship or heart or connection or caring about people and their growth and development. That's the strength. But when I over identify with it, I have to be seen as this way, or I'm not safe, I'm not okay. Then I get the limits of that structure of mind. So yes, we have all this research and even the written database, because we have 3 million surveys, most of which have write-in comments. And so when you study that, which we did in our book, Scaling Leadership, and we sorted into really high creative leaders and really high reactive leaders, and then read their comments, it was astonishing how precisely accurate leaders can describe these two different forms of leadership and how different they are. So we came to the conclusion that leaders really do see these differences and attribute to them, this is effective and this is not effective. In the same way that the theory or the quantitative research correlates. So it was an astonishing look at written data to see that leaders describe leadership similarly, what works and what doesn't.
Yeah. Well, the sad reality, of course, is that most leaders lack that introspection, that self-awareness, that desire to go down that path. Just like we're never taught really how to be parents, we just kind of watch our parents, and most of us really did not have, great role models, I think. Likewise, I think in leadership, I mean, there are obviously all kinds of programs that companies do create, but they don't really get to the core of what, the inside out aspect of it, right? Which I think is essential.
Yeah.
And on conscious leadership class at Tech, at Technological in Monterey. In fact, tonight we're going to be talking about their LCPs, because I've asked all the students to do a self-assessment, and then we're going to discuss, how they can use that as a roadmap for their own growth and development over time. So I wish this particular tool were widely used, even more widely used. In fact, I would want it to be required, I think, in business education. Where do you see, Bob, the state of leadership in the world today? Are you, as I am, to some degree, quite dismayed at what I'm seeing?
Oh,
And
very
the
much so.
lack of good leadership and the lack of moral courage, and integrity, and all of the things that that we hold dear. It seems like we're living through a time where there's not a great deal of that.
I concur, especially if you look at our political systems. Well, let's not go there too much, but I mean, it's just craziness what's going on in this country right now. And I would say, however, that I do see some signs of real hope and moral leadership. For example, one of our clients is Syngenta, and Syngenta's, is a chemical company. They made chemicals which did damage to the environment, and also helped create a kind of green revolution. So, but they're now shifting in a world that no longer wants chemicals. They've completely shifted, both for business reasons, but also they are taking seriously the state of the planet. and saying we can be a major force for the renovation of the earth through agriculture, through how we use the land. And so they're taking that very seriously. They're working with the Nature Conservancy, they're working with climate scientists, and they're serious about using their business for a thriving future. So there are organizations like this that we are working with, and we need more of them.
Yeah, and of course that's what our movement is all about.
Yes.
And we are seeing, of course, a lot of progress in the last decade or so, but also in a current period of time, a lot of backlash. And there are people who are trying to kind of reverse the tide in a way, and
Yes.
trying to go to some imagined utopia that never actually existed. So I think that's something we have to have the courage of our convictions and stick through. Your work has also evolved towards more what you're calling integral leadership now.
Yeah.
And I was fascinated to read some of the materials that you've written around that. And if you could share a little bit about where your thinking is evolving in this direction.
Well, in our core model, which was actually imported from Robert Kegan's work at Harvard. Bob's one of the foremost researchers in adult development. And there are many of these stage development models, each describing the same progression or trajectory as humans evolve into higher and higher orders of consciousness. There's a predictable pattern universally, worldwide, through which these stages evolve. And Bob has a 5-stage model, but the first couple are early stage, childhood, development, and adolescence. And then in adulthood, there's 3. We label them differently: creative, reactive, integral. Those are the forms of leadership that emerge on these stages, later stages of development. And so my work, all the profile was primarily oriented toward creative to reactive to creative. Now I'm really getting focused on what's the fundamental shift and the form of leadership that shows up when it moves from creative to a very high and rare level of leadership, which we're calling integral. And so all of my focus now is on that. And I'm in light of the last discussion we had about the state of the world and its leadership, I'm convinced more and more that the creative level of leadership is minimum system specs for what's required, that the level of complexity and global challenge we face to right in society in relationship to the planet, in relationship to each other, requires an even more evolved or complex, the elegance, the other side of complexity, as you said, form of leadership. And very few are operating at this level. However, we think there's a 10-15% tipping point level of really effective creative leaders that are ready to go the next level. And so I'm really working now on what's a developmental, powerful and deep developmental process that would help leaders move into that stage of development and leadership.
So this has always been one of my questions. We divide people up into their levels of development and their consciousness, and you have the spiral dynamics, the color coding, and so forth. Is it how capable are we as humans, as an ordinary human, to actually go up that hierarchy, or are we just at different points and different people are kind of limited as to how high they can go on that?
I don't think there's any limit to how high you can go. And it's, if you get into the spiritual traditions, it's a kind of infinite scale. And the beauty about human progress or evolution is that people can develop. We used to think the brain, for example, when you got around 20 years old, that was it for brain development. It didn't grow beyond that. We now know that's not the case. With plasticity and continued brain training, you can actually evolve your IQ and evolve the brain, make new connections.
Even the IQ can increase. I used to think it can only decrease, but IQ also, I know emotional and spiritual intelligence can go up, but IQ can increase as well.
Yeah. Yep.
No?
Yep. And so, yes, we see and we measure through these various assessments, movements from one stage to the next with people who do the work. And so I'm hopeful. It's not easy. It's easy to talk about and explain, and there's arduous work involved. As you said, it can take you into, especially in the later stages of development where you're moving from reactive to or creative to integral, you drop even deeper into your ways in which you're blocked, and you can meet shadows, you can run into childhood traumas or even pre-birth traumas and so on, that when you touch them with and meet them with real compassion and presence with another or within yourself, that bound energy or gift or strength that you tucked away and said, I can't show that or be that anymore, that gets me hurt, shamed, killed, I'm not safe if I show up that way, it can re-emerge, can be remembered into the full energetic and deployment of the self. And that opens up very powerful energetic pathways in the body that are like constricted, like a hose. When you kink it, the energy is constricted, and therefore your presence, your power, your transformative or catalytic form of leadership is contained. And so with a work that's both deeper in the sense of dropping into unfinished parts of ourselves, disowned parts of ourselves, but also higher into the higher dimensions of our self as beings. When these two come together and meet, it can be an extraordinary opening of new possibility and new forms of full deployment of the self into circumstances, which is one of the ways we talk about leadership.
Yeah, wow. Well, you know, well, my new book is called Awaken, the path to purpose, inner peace, and healing. And it does describe a series of awakenings in my life and what brought those about, often rooted in some kind of crisis situation and some growth in the hero's journey, kind of framing of, you know, becoming our next version of ourselves. I think one of the challenges we've always realized about developing leaders is how can we somewhat systematically create awakening experiences, you know, and it's so unique to each person. Bob Chapman, when I wrote the book with him on Everybody Matters, he had these three things that happened. You know, one happened at a wedding, one happened at a church, one happened somewhere else, and suddenly something, you know, shifted inside him. But you cannot replicate that because it is unique and it is circumstantial and synchronistic and so forth. And yet I know this is the holy grail to me to some degree, the awakening of leaders. And I know you've done a lot of different kinds of programs with leaders and nature and so forth. Have you come a little closer to figuring that one out?
Yeah, I feel like I'm in the most generative time in my life right now. I'm very excited about it. We've launched a whole series of workshops this year, each coming at it in a different way. And then next year I'm looking at, well, now how do I integrate all that we've learned this year? So we have a workshop coming up where we're going to have two Aikido masters working with us on how do you stay fully embodied and present under pressure, right? And using the Aikido as a way to see how we disconnect, how we go away, how we get energetically ungrounded and so on in a situation. So I'm looking forward to how all this can integrate. But the thing of it is that we are finding in these workshops a level of, it's fascinating because we're going into some very, very vulnerable territory, and yet the experience of people coming through it is almost ecstatic. It's like, wow, I feel so much more open and present and free and alive because of the work that's unfolded. And then we're getting emails back where we're saying, I showed up in a meeting really differently.
Yeah.
And it made all the difference in terms of what happened in that meeting. And so I think, and the interesting thing, Raj, is I don't think that we're inventing anything new here. These processes have been in the healing traditions, in the deeper spiritual traditions, in energetic practice, yogic practice. All of this stuff has been around and it's been applied in our field. It just hasn't been done at scale with leaders. So I think it's not about inventing new ways to transform people, but take the best of all these traditions and bring them together in a way that really creates safety and meets all of it with real grace. And then magic happens, transformation. You just watch it happen beautifully right in front of you.
Yeah, no, it's extraordinary. I mean, your gift is that of an integrator of so much that is out there and bringing it in a cohesive and somewhat structured way so people can actually use it. I liken it to that caterpillar finally evolving to that butterfly that's all inside. I know many 60, 70-year-old caterpillars, right, who never made it out, and they're stuck in that mode, and that's I think the exciting thing about the time we're in, that there is a lot of openness. And I think, leadership development is the same as human development. It's really, we're working at the level of the soul and the human being. And they're going to show up as a parent, as a leader, as a partner in different ways.
The other thing that's happening concurrently is the fundamental findings and learnings from quantum physics are starting to find their way. I was thinking about this last night. Einstein and Max Planck, Einstein relativity, but he was also very involved with Max Planck in establishing quantum mechanics, quantum physics. That stuff was 100 years ago. And it still hasn't made its way into the mainstream consciousness of scientists, let alone the general population. When you start to really get the profundity of what is being learned there, it matches everything we know about consciousness from the deep traditions, the wisdom traditions, the healing traditions, the somatic traditions. There's a level of integration, seeing the same reality from different vantage points, different methodologies that's happening. So I think we're at a time in human history where we really can shift to a much more fundamental understanding of reality itself and what it means to be human, our fundamental interdependence and interconnectedness, inherent unity, as we say in our mission statement. And that is, I think, the 0 point or singularity point of conscious leadership and conscious capitalism that you are trying to bring into the world.
Yeah, and I think, David Wolf and I labeled this the age of transcendence that we entered in 1990. There were so many big shifts that happened in the world, and we've been kind of in the early stages of that, where we're starting to go beyond just the material, what we see and touch in front of us, and think about higher level things and be inspired and motivated by those. And to me, one of the things that I've been talking about is that in my business education, 2 years MBA, 4 years PhD, and then the first 20 years as a professor, it was all about the head and the wallet. It began and ended with the head and the wallet. The story of business as told to us, what is it about? what is leadership, what is every function, marketing, people, HR, etc., all about the head and the wallet. And I said, where's the heart and where's the spirit? And even where's your intuition, the gut, right?
Intuition.
Yeah, so we leave all of those out. And that's where the richness is. Like, I cannot remember a single day of being inspired in my business education. It's like, wow, business can be so beautiful, right? I mean, I never, none of that. And I was never emotionally moved in my business education. I never once connected to my heart in any of it, right? Because it was all about the analytics and the bottom line. And I think that is such a loss because that's where the richness of human beings is. But I think that is also why business becomes such a source of suffering for so many, because it's such an arid environment. It's missing the key elements of what makes us really human. And I had the distinct and unusual experience when I was writing Forms of Endearment of literally being moved to tears, writing some of those stories. And I said, for the first time, I feel my heart connected to my work. I've never experienced tears of joy connected to my work, right? But that is very possible. And in fact, we should be striving for that, right? Because business can be beautiful when you think about it in that way. So to be inspired. And then when I've been teaching conscious capitalism now, I've had a highly unusual experience of MBA students crying in class because of a case study about a bank. Okay. And they said, oh my God, I didn't know it could be like that. Right. And I think that opening up the spirit and the heart, I have this thing for acronyms. And so I've created an acronym called WISH. So you've got the wallet and the intellect, but you need the spirit and the heart also connected.
Yeah.
Every decision, into everything that we do in business really should include all of those. I'm not discounting the wallet. There's a financial intelligence that needs to be there, right? And of course, the analytical intelligence that we use with all our models and everything. But the emotional intelligence and the spiritual intelligence reside, elsewhere, and that's what we're missing, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And it's high time we reorient, and as Nicholas Janney says, relocate the self from the intellect to a much more embodied presence.
Wonderful. I see that Michael has reappeared magically, which means it's time to open it up. We have 65 or 62 participants here and some questions. So Michael, will you please help us navigate? Oh, you're muted still.
My apologies. I said, indeed, it is time to come back and take some questions from the audience. Thank you all for a very spirited conversation, and appreciation to the audience for all of your questions in the Q&A field. I'm going to start with a question from Mark Mears, who is one of our Senior Leader Network members. He says, according to Gallup, lack of engagement has reached historic lows, what the kids are called quiet quitting. Yet many companies are cutting back their leadership and development budgets. How can we get the attention of the C-suite to understand the importance of creating a new wave of conscious leaders? Any thoughts? How do we get those budgets?
Well,
do
you have any thoughts on that, Bob?
Yeah, I do actually, because we're not experiencing that. Our business grew through COVID and beyond. So what we're finding is, and it's a business argument, that a leader, and they get the argument that leadership, especially leadership of the organization, the extended leadership team, and then their teams below them and so on, are not up for the complexity of the challenge that we're facing. And so once a leader really gets that they are the chief development officer for the organization, and that the vitality and depends on the collective effectiveness of the leadership, they're ready to engage. And then you can take them right in. I think there's a new argument that's developing, which has to do with innovation. and especially in the way that we describe the later levels of development as being more heart-centered, intuitive-centered, spiritually oriented flows of energy and intuition, and being informed by a larger field of intelligence. I think there's an emerging argument for catalytic innovation, which takes you right into practices of deep connection, deep dialogue, radical humanity, and so on. So it's it's not, for some who are more enlightened, it's development for development's sake. For most organizations, it's because if we do create these kind of creative cultures, or be creative or beyond, the business will thrive. So we're at Roche, for example. They want to bring more life-saving medicine to humanity faster, and they're doing a large-scale agile reorganization and agile processes, and they're absolutely clear that that whole system and culture will not boot up on reactive leadership. So that once that argument happens, then there's a willingness and even an eagerness to invest in what it's going to take to create that kind of thriving both culture and system.
Wonderful.
Hey, Michael, if you don't mind, I'm flipping through the questions in the interest of time. I'll just pick out a couple. So there's one from Anonymous, which refers to narcissism. That is LCP able to pick up leaders with those tendencies, narcissistic or even, I would say, sociopathic? And is it able to help them come out of that or evolve from that?
Well, it's meant to be in the normally neurotic range of human activity. And so it's not a clinically diagnostic tool. However, when you see people scoring very, very high on arrogance and autocratic and harshly critical and so on, you'll often find somebody who's got at least those tendencies. And, and to the extent that they can start to really see them, they can start to break through on it.
And then Marianne Baker has a question. And good to see you as not see you, but see your name here, Marianne. She's excited to hear us talk about deeper inner work. And she's saying, I imagine leaders don't knock on our doors asking for pre-birth trauma to be healed. But what is their desire in their own language? In my experience, it's really sort of the unhappiness, feelings of burnout, ineffectiveness, but really a deep down, just sort of a disconnect from their work. And they're just not feel. I know in my own life, even after I found purpose, I realized that did not lead to happiness. It led to meaning, but there was so much more healing that needed to be done inside me. So I think just for people to be aware of their own pain and how much pain they are in, I think is enough to know. And then we get into why that is. We have a program that we started a few months ago at Tech, which we're writing a book on now. It's called Healing Leaders, 7 Steps to Recovery of Self. And it's about healing leaders as in healing them, but also them becoming healing leaders for others. And the steps are know yourself, love yourself, be yourself, express yourself, become whole, choose your life, and heal yourself. And in each of those, we have a lot of very immersive and very often painful and transformational kind of experience that they go through. So I think if they come there just knowing, I don't know, they can't put their finger on it, but they just know that they are in pain in some way, that what they're doing isn't working for them or for the people they lead. And then we can start getting into some of these deeper things. So how do you feel about that question?
Well, 2 things. I think part of it is at what level are they ready to engage? So that the leadership circle profile and all the work we do around that is reactive to creative. And so, no, they're not coming in asking for healing birth trauma right. But then we're targeting this tipping point level of leaders in high positions usually that are very effective, and saying, what's the next journey? What's the next level of leadership? And they're up for that. And one of the things, we did a pilot a couple of years ago of some of the early integration when I was working on it. And when we did the evaluations, I was surprised because the stuff that I was felt most edgy about, or like they'll feel this is irrelevant or a bridge too far, were the things that were most positively received. And those were, one was shadow work. And I'm talking deep work right into a core wound for someone publicly in a virtual session, to a person. Each one that stepped into that said it was life-changing and one of the most valuable parts of the program. And those witnessing concurred it was a really powerful part of what we did. The other was energetic practices that opened up intuition. And we played with intuition. We played with running energy through the body and sort of expanding the field. And we connected that with quantum physics. They said that was the best part of the program. And so when you get those two together, it's a transformative experience. And so we're finding a real receptivity. And that now it's a matter of integration and finding the framing. Your question goes to framing. How do you frame that in a way which makes it really business relevant?
And I remember experiencing some of that in Utah when we did the intuition part, and people were coming up with extraordinary things out of nowhere. They said, wow, so there's so much there, Bob. Thank you. This was a very short conversation for the richness of what we could have also added here. But people can find Bob on the web, of course, and you can find out about some of these courses. Is there a particular place, Bob?
Yeah, the Leadership Circle website. We're just starting to get it organized around some of these emerging workshops. There'll be more. Stay tuned. We're going to do a whole series next year, but it'll be a few months before, a couple months before I get all that put together and put on our website.
Great. And my website is rajsisodia.com. You can go there and then get links to various things that I've talked about as well. And I want to thank all of you for being here today. Michael, if you could save some of those questions and send them to us so that if we have, we're able to respond later, we can share them with the group. And thank you for moderating.
Yeah, thank you both for being so generous with your time. Just a quick announcement to the audience members joining us. I did put a link to a short survey in the chat. If you could just take a moment, it does help inform our future programming. And with that, I know we've run a little bit over. So again, thank you, Raj and Bob, for being so generous, going a bit over, and for the audience members who stayed with us. Thank you so much for the riveting conversation, both of you.
My
Have a
pleasure.
great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.